Hi, this is Natalie Lander, voice of Kinsey, Tara Branford, Stargirl, and many others. You are listening to a W2Mnet podcast. You can visit W2Mnet.com for other podcasts about entertainment, video games, sports, and wrestling. You are listening to Video Games to the Max.
Hello and welcome to a special episode that's actually a crossover episode of a Video Games to the Max with both myself, Sean Garmer, and of course always here with me, Mr. Marc Morrison.
Howdy.
And sort of representing the Radulich and broadcasting side, and of course Radulich Broadcasting is what helps make W2 Network an actual network. They make wonderful shows reviewing movies, TV shows, old stuff, boxing, old movies, and then they even put these old movies on trial, which is usually the show that this fine person that's here with us right now, Mr. Sean Comer, is usually on with Marc Radulich. And I'd like to just say thank you, Sean, for being on with us here.
Hey, my pleasure. If there's one thing the internet loves, it's crossovers.
People named Sean and Marc.
Yeah.
Point. Good point.
Yep. So it's a different Marc and now two Seans on this show. So, thankfully one of us is hosting, so it's not like the one time you and I did Glow, and I'm sure Marc was wondering how the heck do I... What? He's just like, I have to use your last names, I guess. So what we're here to do is talk about the Console Wars documentary that was released on CBS All-Access about a week ago, almost. And on September 23rd, of course, there was a book that is based on this documentary. I think this was supposed to be a movie, and then they just decided that it worked better as a documentary.
Well, it was supposed to be a movie, and then like a fictional TV show, which I think they're still working on, and then also then documentary as well now.
Yeah, so this sort of like takes the gist of what happened and tries to a huge book, which I think is like, I have the hardback copy, which I don't even know if it has a paperback copy or not. I think it doesn't actually. By Blake J. Harris. I think it's around 300 and something pages. Smashed into a 1 hour and 30-minute documentary. So what do you guys, like, I guess as in, before we get started talking about the documentary, unfortunately for some of you that have been, if you're hearing this is your first time hearing this, whether it's through the TV party side or through, Video Games to the Max, first of all, thank you for listening. But if you've been with us a while, we've kind of talked about this before, so sorry for Marc and I are kind of going over content we've already talked about, but because Sean has not been on with us before, what are your sort of like gaming origins? Where did you start? And as this is a Nintendo versus Sega thing, where do you land on that, I guess?
You know what? Growing up, I owned at two different points, both an NES and a Sega Genesis. I started off, of course, with the Nintendo. And then after a few years, my parents offered to buy me a Sega. This was back in the early to mid 90s. And then I think it was, about when was it? About right around the time we moved to South Dakota in the late 90s, like 1999. I just kind of faded away from video gaming for a while. I hadn't bought a next generation or current generation, as they were, console in a bit. And so I actually missed out on a lot of the great years of gaming that a lot of my contemporaries got to take part in. The nascent years of the PlayStation, the dying years of the Sega Saturn and the Dreamcast. And then I kind of picked it back up again in 2004, when I bought a used PlayStation 2 and like a shit ton of games for about $99, $100, or $200 or so from a coworker at Northwest Missouri State University. And that was kind of when I started to get my toes really back into it. I also bought a GameCube around the same time. The two games that really got me back into gaming in full swing, I would say were, well, first it was the very first Kingdom Hearts game. And then not too long after that, it was the first God of War. And everything just kind of snowballed from there. And I've kind of been a PlayStation gamer ever since. I own a PlayStation 3. We own a PlayStation 4. My wife to be and I plan on getting a PlayStation 5. As far as where I kind of come down on the side of the Nintendo or Sega, Sega was definitely cooler at the time. They took gaming graphically to places that it hadn't been before, and where Nintendo hadn't yet pushed their games. But as far as who had the better games overall and who had the more extensive variety of what was available, it was, and who had the, consistently had the better games, yeah, I gotta say it was hands down Nintendo.
Well, Mark?
I got into games. I got into games from like the handheld point of view. I'm not having like a really weird. If you thought like the Nintendo, like the NES was going to destroy the TV or something, God knows why. So if you bought like a Game Boy, I think maybe a Game Gear at a certain point, that thing just ate batteries like too bad. So I didn't get I missed the NES pretty much completely. I went to a friend's house occasionally and played it, but that was about it. I moved in with my dad, and he got me like a SNES pretty much that week, and then it was game on, quite literally, after that. I got a SNES, a Sega Genesis. I even got the Sega CD-32X at that point. I had a Virtual Boy, which is doing well nowadays. I had two of those things at one point.
Wow.
Because I think the first one broke, because of those stupid mirrors. And then, yeah, like PlayStation all the way up. I don't have every system in the world, but I own quite a few. And when it comes to PS2 and Xboxes, I have multiples of those. God knows why. As far as I recognize at the time, I kind of saw Nintendo and Sega as kind of, neck and neck, really. I thought Sonic was faster, but Mario had much more of an elaborate game system going on, or level system and world. But I like both. Genesis had faster games typically. But I always think about, I remember an old Funko Land clerk said, I overheard him say one time, I think he was talking to some parent, he was like, Genesis is good for sports games, and the SNES is good for everything else.
I think that's funny, because I think that's kind of a condition, kind of a dichotomy that for a long time persisted into even the earlier years of the PlayStation Xbox feud. And that's that the PlayStation had the more dependable hardware, and they had the better library of exclusives, but I think the Xbox was kind of looked at as the definitive console if you were a competitive gamer, and particularly if you wanted to play online. For the longest time, PlayStation's online experience absolutely couldn't touch Xbox Live.
Well, it wasn't just that, it was also the games looked better on both the original Xbox and the 360.
I'll give you that.
Compared to the PS2 and PS3, especially the PS3. A lot of the games would come out on PS3 and they'd have to be patched or they wouldn't work at all. Well, that's just Bethesda being Bethesda bad, but...
No, certain games just had poor port work, or Bayonetta 1 was messed up on PS3, or one of the Ninja Gaidens was also screwed up. But... yeah, that's to be expected, I guess, considering that architecture.
Yeah, for me, I knew nothing of there being console wars, at all. Me and my sheltered, just having a Super Nintendo and not having a bunch of games for it. I was very much a sports, I played Mario, Kirby, sports games, and I really wasn't that deep of a gamer when I was a kid. I liked the things that, I like sports, so I like sports games, and that's kind of how that worked until, Pokemon came in my life, and when I had my Game Boy Pocket, and eventually the Game Boy Color, and that changed everything. I all of a sudden started liking, different games, especially RPGs, and that kind of, molded my what I like in games, and then of course having an Xbox in those elementary school years where you're having slumber parties and having the system link and all that stuff. So I wound up liking, Halo and shooters and all that. But when it comes down to that era of gaming, my brother who's about 9 years older than me, he had a Nintendo. There are pictures of me watching him, sitting next to him, playing Mario on the Nintendo. I don't really ever remember playing it because I was so young then. I think I was like 5 or 6. All I have memories of is Super Nintendo was like Mario All-Stars, Mario World, Kirby, sports games, and maybe a few other things, So that's what I remember. I didn't know, I knew there was a Genesis. I had friends that had Genesises, and,
Genocide?
Yeah, how would that work, right? Plural. So yeah, like I'd go over to a friend's house named Travis, and he had games, and I'd go over there and play. I had no idea that there was a Saturn or a 32X or anything like that. And then my dad got me a Dreamcast one day, and that's the only Sega thing, I ever owned, and I loved that a lot. I mean, they had some good games for it. Unfortunately, I was still, I didn't work. I didn't have an idea of that system died, and they were just no longer making games for it. And then, of course, PS2 comes out, and Sega goes off and isn't Sega anymore. But yeah, that's kind of my gaming history, and I've had most of the consoles since then, one or another. I had times like you, Mr. Comer, where because of things going on in my life, I couldn't play games at all. But for the most part, it's been a thing that I've stuck with. And since you're the one that said that you had a Nintendo growing up, what was that like for you? Do you have like memories of, did your parents just come and give it to you one day? Did you actually go to the store with them? What were the memories of your Nintendo?
No, I mean, we were a middle class family, but not, we did fine. We wanted for absolutely nothing, but we were one where Dad for a lot of years was the sole breadwinner in the house, and we didn't take a whole lot of super extravagant family vacations or anything. Dad was, and he is very much a Luddite. Despite the fact that although he'd swear on a stack of Bibles on lying, when we did get the NES, I think he spent almost as much time playing Tetris and Duck Hunt as I did playing Mario Party, Castlevania, Punch-Out, and Mario Brothers. It was about a year or two of my asking before we finally got one for Christmas. Prior to that, this was back when brick and mortar video stores still ruled the earth, and for like birthday or special occasion sleepovers or whatever, my parents would kind of throw us a bone and rent a Nintendo for a weekend and a couple of games. And then one year for Christmas, like that, my first half dozen or so games, was kind of our big Christmas present. And so, that was a lot of fun times with the neighborhood kids coming over, sometimes bringing their own games, sometimes playing whatever I had. Those classic days of couch gaming. Dad and I sometimes playing Pac-Man or Duck Hunt together, or Tetris down in the basement. That Dad eventually started to sometimes just go down and play Tetris whether I was playing or not. I could be off working on homework or something, and he would go down there and monopolize the TV for a little while. And again, I remember a few years ago, this memory was brought up to him and his second wife. And she kind of joked, "What? You were a gamer?" And he reacted to it like it was an insult. Like we had said the man wasn't arch Nazi or a KKK member. I wasn't a gamer.
Back when that really wasn't a thing, you just played games, right?
Yeah. I mean, there really wasn't a whole lot of gamer culture, largely because this was pre-internet.
Yeah.
The closest thing you had to gamer culture was shit like Nintendo Power and FuncoLand and just whoever you talked to in the neighborhood, including that one kid whose uncle worked at Nintendo. Which is, God, it's such humble beginnings compared to what we've got today.
Yeah, certainly. They're definitely, that's one of the things looking back at it, man, it really was different to today. I mean, some of the stuff is very similar to what's going on today, and especially it's very appropriate that we're getting this documentary when there is a whole new console war a continuing of a console war that is about to start again and happening right now with the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X coming out, and we'll talk about that at the end, what we think about the new generation is about to be upon us. But yeah, I mean, Mark, so you said you were, your dad got you the Super Nintendo and Sega and all that. What are your, I guess, memories of that? Favorite games, that kind of thing?
For the SNES, I didn't have a ton of games. I had Mario World, which I think I got out, all 96 levels, or exits in. I had Mario RPG, that, and a game called Vi for the Sega CD were my first RPGs. And I remember having Super Star Wars, and that sucked ass because it was way too hard.
That game was a beast.
Yeah, I remember going into stores like Target and Kmart and Meijer and stuff like that, and playing kiosks. Kmart used to have a really cool kiosk where it had an NES, Game Boy, and Super Nintendo next to each other, all in the same unit essentially. And they had TVs in not on the ceiling, but in the wall, and you could play there. So yeah, I had a SNES and then a Genesis a little later on, and then I kept bolting more and more shit onto that thing, and getting less and less good experiences along the way.
Well, since we're on the Sega chart, that's where this documentary kind of starts, is giving you the origins of, because this is really, it's not so much an origin story of Sega and Nintendo. It is an origin story of Sega of America and Nintendo America going at it over here, because in Japan this is a time where, not like today, where things are a bit more closer, right? You still have those things that come out in Japan first and all that stuff, but back then, it really was, there are so many things that come out in Japan that it seems like that's a whole nother world that's existing over there that we don't even get half the stuff. Or it comes years later and it's called something else, or, whatever. So
yeah, which one of the mother games is it that Nintendo fans are still screaming for?
Mother 3.
3, that's it.
Yeah. Or the Final Fantasies that we got, was it 1, 2, and 3, and they were actually 1, 4, and 6 or whatever, and that wasn't fixed until way later. So, but yeah, just getting to learn how Sega starts with people staying at comfort inns, and they hire Tom Kalinske from Mattel, and he starts things off, and then they have to deal with Sega Japan as well to kind of get things rolling. Is there any of that origin stuff that you guys found interesting, or?
Every bit of everything that you just mentioned was so fascinating to me.
Yeah, Kalinske is a good figure for that because he's still pretty dynamic and with it. I thought some of the Nintendo guys were a little more sleepy, but Kalinske still has most of it together.
Well, I mean, that's why he worked at all those companies, right? And did great things. He certainly was one of those talents. I definitely agree. Some of those other guys felt like they were just I mean, it's actually quite, like, as somebody that read the book, right, and got to know all these names, like, it's still kind of cool that they were able to get pretty much everybody on an interview, and they're all still around to talk to and tell their story and everything, so that was good on their part. They got pretty much everybody that was
Well, they didn't
important.
get, like, Miyamoto, which I thought was interesting. Or,
well, but I don't think Miyamoto, they definitely tried not to get hardly, like, any of the actual, like, Japan people that stayed in Japan, they didn't focus on them at all.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I don't know that Miyamoto doesn't really do, interviews like that. So
I at least I had, like, a few videos of him. I was kind of surprised about that, honestly.
Well, I mean, you can't really tell the story of Nintendo without talking about him.
It was bound to come up eventually. I was a little surprised that, we didn't get any clever sound bites or anything from Reggie Fils-Aimé.
Well, he came way later.
Because he came later.
Oh, did he? I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
It was a GameCube.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right.
Shows what I know. I could have sworn during one of the clips of, like, a Nintendo office powwow that as I looked at the table, I was like, is that Reggie that I see there?
No, he was at least 2000. He was like 2000.
I mean, he might have been around, but he wasn't like a figurehead.
True. No, like, he was like running Pizza Hut in Canada, before Nintendo. So
right.
Well, I mean, first of all, I can't put my finger on what it is about it, but there's just something that I find so damn kind of charming and fascinating about the fact that Shinobu is still living in the same Comfort Inn.
Yeah, right.
Well,
as he was during the height of the Sega.
That's all Sega can afford these days. So,
but yeah.
Is he still okay? So, like, is he still working for Sega? Or
he is.
Okay.
I looked at some of the people that, like, because I was curious about, like, where these people are, and he's still at Sega apparently.
I mean,
that's amazing.
It kind of reminds me of it when you think about the fact that he was a part of such a successful era for the company. It kind of reminds me of, God, I'm drawing a blank on him, this one major league pitcher that I heard about years ago who was signed to your typical beefy multi-million-dollar major league contract, and yet he was still living out of his van down by the beach in California.
Along with Matt Foley?
Ha ha ha. Yeah, it wasn't like he was forced to or anything. It was just like his choice.
He was so used to it.
Or maybe he just dug the simplicity. I mean, very much not by choice. I lived out of my car in Phoenix for 8 months, so I mean, I'm no one to say one way or another, but but it's just there's just something that seems kind of so humble and sort of grounded about the fact that during that time he assuredly made enough money to have gotten an actual apartment or at least a small house someplace out here, and yet there he is, kind of still sort of playing it safe in the same old Comfort Inn, and I'm sure they're probably still just as happy to have him on that continuous basis. But there's the fact that the shrewd tactical business mind that was so largely responsible for turning Sega around was a guy who you couldn't even really call a video game guy, who just kind of carpet bagged over from Mattel. And then there's what I think is the really fascinating juxtaposition of the fact that when you look at the people who were steering the ship for Sega and who helped to propel them ahead of Nintendo, they really, as you're talking to them, they don't come across very often as true video game people, so to speak. Unlike Nintendo, where you can tell that these people really have this abiding passion for the medium for the most part, sometimes to the extent that it was kind of like the inverse.
I wouldn't necessarily say that about Howard Lincoln.
One guy.
Or Peter Main either. I think he just really liked being a marketing bully.
But I'm speaking in generalities here. Yeah. I'm speaking generally in terms of the tone of the way both sides came across is you've got, and really as I'll hopefully be able to kind of elucidate a little bit later, it's what I think was a difference maker in the war was the fact that Nintendo had great video game people, sometimes to the detriment of what could have been the wisest business decisions they could have made in the middle of the war. Whereas Sega, on the other hand, you had people that knew how to be truly ruthless, cerebral marketers. You had some real latter-day Don Draper types in there, but they more often than not just didn't have a clue what really made a great game and how to make great games consistently.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's the thing that's sort of like funny about Sega, right? Is that during this period, you're having to rely so much, well, because there's so much juxtaposition between what is happening in Japan, what Sega Japan is, what Nintendo Japan is, to what Nintendo America is, to what Sega America is. And like seeing both of those origins, right? Mm-hmm. Of how, Sega's, they already have the Genesis and the Game Gear. Tom just kind of goes and sees it, and then they kind of have to start the marketing of like, well, how do we do this?
It's funny because like I read part of the book. I kind of stuck right after the Game Gear, but like the documentary completely doesn't even mention that, like the Game Boy or Game Gear stuff.
Well, they showed it in that one picture, and that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? If I'm going to
that's weird too. Like they didn't mention really the Game Boy, which is also important. But I guess because the Game Gear was such a like not competitive thing to the Game Boy, I think that takes away from what the story they're trying to tell. So, Yeah.
Well, the audio book is like, 8 hours long, give or take, maybe. They're not going to have an 8-hour long documentary. Like, of course they're going to cut out certain shit.
Well, no, but like, there's the Game Boy one hands down. There's not a war there. So like it doesn't go along with the story they're trying to tell. So because the war was really the Super Nintendo and the Genesis and then some of the stuff that came later. But like, I think what's cool is just going through and seeing, okay, it really took some people that aren't necessarily gaming people to say, here, we have this plan. Let's start picking away at things that Nintendo is really good at. And
Here's the thing. I mean, Sean, you brought up the point about like, Nintendo is kind of headed up by more gamers, but it's like, that's not necessarily a good thing. Like I would actually much rather have business people to an extent making some decisions, because I think like gamers will get, fly too close to the sun or get blinded by, business realities or.
Well, the same thing that would happen with the Sega Japan people, right? They didn't understand what the marketers in Sega America were trying to tell them, like, hey, this works.
Well, the way I kind of saw it is Nintendo's sort of commitment to gaming as an art form, and this is where I'll agree with Marc kind of wholeheartedly. I think that was what eventually won Nintendo the war, but it had to cost them a lot of battles along the way first for them to get there, because in the 90s, Sega, Tom Kalinske in particular, was able to see which way the wind was blowing. He was able to get his finger on the pulse of what was changing, what had been untapped, and they were able to use that to kind of overcome the weakness of, as I said, Nintendo having, almost undebatably the better overall library of games. But Sega was able to present itself in a way that appealed to an audience that, Nintendo was just getting kind of bored of. I mean, hell, I'm coming over here from the Radulich and Broadcasting Network, so allow me to sing you the song of my people and phrase this kind of in the form of a wrestling metaphor. It was Eric Bischoff and the brass at WCW looking at the cartoony shit that the WWF was doing in the mid-90s, seeing that people were getting restless, and then churning out something that people had never seen before that maybe couldn't match the WWF on some levels, say production quality, but it absolutely for years on end surpassed them in others. But again, as was also the case, they just weren't able to sustain that in the long run because eventually that veneer kind of wore off, and all of a sudden the shortcomings they just couldn't be ignored anymore.
Well, and it's also funny that the corporation eventually got in the way. Very much like Sega Japan eventually got in the way for Sega America. So
I assume you're talking about RoboCop and Sting teaming up, right?
Yeah, that was one of the that's I totally agree with you, Sean. Like the entire time, I mean, like I've already seen it. I mean, again, like obviously histories of video game stuff has existed. There's another one that Netflix had that we were going to do a show on. He might do it eventually. I just feel like I need to watch it again because it's been so long now that a lot of that got out of my head. But like that was the exact same thing I was thinking of. Wow, there's so many parallels to almost the same trajectory between WWE being the mega, we're number one, we're the only thing around, and then WCW comes in and absolutely like just floors everyone and, you know, changes the way you look at wrestling and then eventually dies out to the point where like same thing with Sega, you know, they revolutionize everything and then Nintendo's absolutely, you know, shell shocked and then eventually Nintendo, because they do a little bit of attitude themselves, right? They can get that power back, but
yeah, and you see, and that's where Marc really has a great point, is the fact that you had a company that was being run by people who were kind of so entrenched inside this fortified gamer bubble. And in any industry, when you have that, sometimes that is exactly what you need, is somebody else who has had their eyes elsewhere. And it can be kind of a double-edged sword, though, because, you know, one of the things that really ruined the LA Times for a lot of years was they brought in a General Mills executive, who didn't understand journalism and didn't understand journalistic ethics. Going back to wrestling, WCW at one point, he was nearly run into the ground by a fucking pizza man.
Just like Nintendo.
Yeah. But in some cases, if you have somebody who can come in and can kind of parlay those broadly applicable skills and mindsets across industries and kind of pick up on the nuances of a new one, that can carry you a long way, and that can revolutionize the whole industries. And in this case, you know, yeah, Sega might have eventually burned out, they might have lost, but it goddamn sure wasn't without making an impact either.
Well, I mean, and you know, Sega spurred on one of the ones that are still existing today. So, like, that's what's cool is, like, let's take that approach here, because obviously this is a story of the rise of Sega, how Nintendo starts, and then how eventually Nintendo keeps going. I don't think that you need us to go through the whole history lesson. Probably at this point, if you're listening, you don't need to have watched this documentary to know what we're talking about. Maybe some of the finer points that we can, you know, get into, which is what I want to do. But let's take it from this point of when Nintendo is starting, right? They have to start from humble beginnings and barely watch people buy their first system at a store. And then they go all of a sudden from, because they're the only thing in town, they can start really hammering these retailers like, no, you're going to sell our thing the way we want to sell it. You're going to sell it the price that we want to sell it. You're going to have a certain amount of retail space for our product. You're not going to be able to have other competitors around. Like, being this absolute monolith of a company. And then, like, that was the most fascinating part to me, of like just getting to see how Nintendo was slowly like picked away at with so many different things that all together were able to get Sega there.
See,
And, like,
you say that, and whereas on the other hand, my mind just went to, God damn it, you've really been mastering your anti-consumer bullshit for decades, haven't you?
Right? Yeah, no, exactly. Right. You see where it starts. You see where it starts. You see where it starts. The whole that question of what was it? Was it a politician that said, "Is this ever going to come down in price later?" And they're like, "Well, we don't know." Like, well, that's their question that people still have on their games, right? So, they might sell you the console cheaper at some point, but the games are still going to be $60 or whatever price it's going to be. But like, what did you, Mark, find interesting about all that? Like, just how Sega was able to knock Nintendo off its perch.
I mean, yeah, it was good. Like, the Walmart stuff was interesting to hear about, like, Walmart being
That was fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, Nintendo's own launch was interesting because, they were only in FAO Schwartz, and it was basically like, hey, if these units don't sell, we're not going to this thing is going to come out in America. I thought the woman that Sega had was pretty cool, like the marketing woman. Like, she was...
Oh, Ellen Van Berserk is one of the coolest people.
Yeah.
I think when I read the book, like, I came away from, she's one of the people that, like, I really liked out of everybody that is important figures. Like, she really felt not only important, but cool. Yeah.
But you can tell she's not a gamer, but she's still interested in the product, and that's kind of good enough, really. Like,
right.
She doesn't need to know, like, the third world in Sonic the Hedgehog 2. But the fact that she knows what Sonic the Hedgehog is cool. Or, good. Yeah, like, Nintendo, I mean, they had a monopoly at the time because they literally were the only thing going on. I mean, the Sega had the Master System.
Well, they saved video games, so that helped them.
I mean, Sega had the Master System, but no one cared about that thing. So, it was all about
It's hilarious they don't even mention it in this thing. The Master System didn't even exist.
I mean, for all intents and purposes, the Master System didn't exist. Like, has any of us even played one?
No. Seriously, I didn't know, like, it wasn't until, like, I had read some history of video game books that I knew that they even had a Master System. I thought Sega started with the Genesis.
Like, I knew about the power-based converter for the Genesis. That's like this, like, Master System bolt-on thing you can put into it, but that's about it. Like, I never played a Master System. No one really has. So, yeah.
I'm familiar with it. I think I maybe played one for a few minutes one time.
Yeah.
But yeah, my first Sega experience was the Genesis.
I mean, I have more experience with the TurboGrafx than the Master System.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Yikes. And man, you are a scholar of classic systems and hardware.
Yeah.
That surprises me.
So yeah, like, I thought that was good. I mean, yeah, Nintendo got somewhat complacent too. So, yeah, the brash young upstart.
It happens.
Yeah.
It happens. The very worst thing that can happen is to have no competition.
I like the, Tom coming in with those, like, 4 points and how he was able to, like, they were able to go through each one of those and just, okay, I mean, think about Trip Hawkins was doing stuff with EA Sports, right? But, like, it really wasn't until you had the Madden game and it was exclusive to Genesis for, like, I think the first couple of years or something like that. It eventually got on Super Nintendo because I had Madden 96. And I think Madden 95 was on there too, I'm not sure. But, like, I always found that interesting of how that started. Nintendo didn't care about that stuff, right? I mean, they had their Tecmo Bowls and all that, but, like, that was a major factor to get people that are not necessarily always gamers to look at that and go, oh, there's a game for me, and then
which, funny enough, that's kind of become Nintendo's market ever since the Wii came along.
No, yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. I mean, they do, but they still generally, like, their system is still not the system you want to play your sports games on because the Switch is completely yeah.
Well, no, exactly. Yeah. But what I'm saying is the main thing that Nintendo has been leaning on ever since the Wii is, number one, it's got a gimmicky mechanic that's accessible and novel and fun for everybody. It's fun for the non-gamers because they have a way to play that they can manage more than having to be confused and overwhelmed by a dozen some buttons on a controller. People who are veteran gamers can get into it because, hey, this is kind of fresh, kind of different than what I'm used to, but I'm still able to have roughly the same experience. They got the classic familiar library. It's all good. But where they've always kind of fallen short ever since then is the fact that the ports of a lot of other games that were hugely successful on other consoles have often been, to put it nicely, fucking terrible.
Yeah.
Especially with a lot of big multiplayer titles nowadays. Overwatch is an abomination on the Switch. So quite frankly is Dead by Daylight. And if you go back to the Wii U, that was hardware that was so frustrating that a lot of third-party developers refused to work with it at all.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could say the same for...
I mean, that's existed since the GameCube.
Yeah, other than, the GameCube was the last time where they actually had a shot at being similar. And then there was still times where the GameCube version wasn't good, but there are GameCube standout games that are just as good or whatever. But
Eternal Darkness, the original Resident Evil 4...
Resident Evil remake on there.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But even Soul Calibur was. I had Soul Calibur on the GameCube because I wanted to play as Link, and I thought it was still as good as the Xbox or PS2 version. But if you go to the 64 to later on the Wii U, all the versions of those games that are ports usually. Because it's inferior hardware compared to their brethren, they're not gonna play as well. Or the Wii just had to have completely different mechanics because of the Wii remote, which made it to where it's like, why do I want to play almost any of these games on here? But and I obviously you're alluding to the one of the big things that ended up hurting Nintendo was which I don't necessarily know that's the major thing that wound up making everybody go, I want to have a Genesis. It was already all those other things, but they obviously painted the picture of Mortal Kombat getting to have the blood and Super Nintendo not, getting to have the blood as the huge reason, right? I think obviously Sonic as well. I mean, that was fascinating to me too. That really was one of the first ever, if not the first ever, we're actually trying to do a worldwide launch here of a game. And, it was Sonic 2, and how they had to prepare that and choosing this day and all of that stuff. And they went head to head with Mario and decided, okay, we'll choose this blue hedgehog and it's going to be the thing, and, you don't think, it's weird to think about, that difference in Sonic being so fast and then Mario super slow, but it's
yeah, but I mean, Sonic game has, I don't know, 12 levels or 12 stages. I mean, maybe 14 or 16. Mario has, 50.
Yeah.
See, and again, that's another example of where it's abundantly apparent that you didn't have video game people kind of running the show. Was that they just saw faster, wee! This means we're better! And I think they genuinely believe that. Whereas, and don't get me wrong, I say this is someone who absolutely loves the first three Sonic games, and the two kind of style throwbacks that came out a couple of years ago. But you also can't deny that Mario while it may be slower paced, also offers the slightly, I know deeper is a laughable term when describing a platformer or a Mario game, but it is a deeper, more varied.
Yeah, there was a lot of variety in those levels.
It's longer, but if you think about it, Mario has basically 6 or 7 distinct worlds by itself, and there's 5 stages in each. But it's by the third or fourth, you're getting kind of tired of it.
Well, but it's also more replay value.
Sure.
As well as has been proven a number of times over the years. And the thing is, I think if Sega had some really kind of savvy, kind of not to gatekeep too much, but true gamers among their people, that you would have kind of seen that just kind of admitted, at least in hindsight, in the documentary, is that's where we always fell short.
Well, yeah, like Nintendo definitely believed in value, like giving you.
Well, think about like Mario versus like something like Kid Chameleon. I mean, Mario has a world structure, but Kid Chameleon has at least as many levels as Mario World. But because you can't really see them that well in like an overarching world, that's why it doesn't seem like that.
True, but Nintendo has also been able to take Mario and keep things not just fresher and newer, but also equally as enjoyable over the years.
On the SNES, there was 3 Mario games, actually 4, and 1.5 of those sucked.
Let's see. On the SNES, there was Super Mario World.
Mario Kart, that's a good
Mario
one.
Kart.
That's okay.
RPG.
Mario's missing. Mario RPG, that's good. Mario's missing, which is fucking abysmal.
When did Paper Mario come out?
That was
Paper
GameCube.
Mario.
GameCube?
Yeah, GameCube.
Okay.
And then there was Yoshi's Island, which is
That's good.
Half a good game.
Yeah. I mean, the whole having to grab Mario thing is kind of annoying, but I thought it was a good, like, just doing something different with the platformer. And I think overall, it's just, like, we keep going back to that, right? But it's just, it's honestly the truth of, and I think it's encompassed by the part where they show, which they went into more detail in that documentary about that than I thought they would have, because that's a kind of I wouldn't say major chunk, but they go into some deep storytelling in the book about how, Goodby winds up being the marketing team, right? And like, there's a lot more story there than they could really tell you, but they did a lot more than I thought they would. I thought that would be something they kind of they toss in the commercials in there and then not explain that much. And like, those, if, looking back, I went back and, looked at some of those commercials and it's like, it really does seem like night and day how Sega was able to they really were just wonderful at, man, this seems awesome. I want to go play this thing. Like, and Nintendo's over here with these, whatever commercials and yeah, so like, I think we go back to that, but it's like, Sega really just had this, at least at the time for Sega America, I really had these smart, marketing tactics of being able to get you to, hey, let's buy this system right now. Maybe I don't think about all the games I play on it or didn't play on it, but yeah, and it sold them a bunch of units at least. But I think also it's like we have to think about that time frame. We're still looking at like gaming isn't like it is today, right? Where we have so many games and a lot of the people that are buying those systems, you're not buying 20, 30 games for those kids. You're buying 1 or 2, 3 or 4.
Even games back then were more expensive than they are now. I mean, it's funny, people are freaking out about $70 games now, and it's like, there were games back in the days that were $80.
Yep, exactly. Games were expensive, right? Because there was no, like, oh, here, this is what they cost relative to what the market is.
The funniest part is, like, the most expensive games back then were sports games.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, they still were on the 64. They were like $70. But like, that didn't change for a while. I remember I bought this like college hoops game that was, well, I didn't buy it, and I coaxed my mom into it at a store. It was like $65, and I would have never, if my adult self was sitting there going, what the hell is wrong with you? But like, like at that point, I really wanted it for some reason. So, that's the thing is like still the whole how much games cost, how much everything. So like, Sega could get away with having a bunch of games that necessarily weren't good in its library, but if you had the 1 or 2 or 3, right, or 4 that were good, you could sell the console on that. And then they buy those 3 or 4 games that would come out, and that's enough, right? You didn't have to have this library of games that comes out later that people are going to keep buying games for, like I think you do today, because, you know, I don't know. Anything you guys want to, like, get into about what was discussed in the doc we haven't touched on, or?
It's not necessarily something that was discussed, but I will throw this out there. I absolutely adore the 16-bit interstitial scenes. Those are good, yeah. It kept everything so entertaining and so engaging. In places where I think in the runtime where you would find a lot of documentaries starting to become extremely, extremely dry, if you didn't have just an absolutely stunning gotcha moment or inflammatory quote or something. It keeps you involved with just these lovely little Genesis-like scenes, including even some rather impressive Mortal Kombat knockoffs.
Yeah.
To depict the war between the executives. But no, if we're going to talk about anything else, let's kind of jump ahead a little bit. And what did you guys think of the point when Nintendo decided to take the gloves off and kind of start outplaying Sega at their own game?
That was interesting. The play it loud stuff. Yeah.
Well, that, but I mean, they had the 2 things I was thinking about, the Sega, the CD thing, where Sega Japan kind of fucked over Sega America, and then they, and then it's like, well,
and then
okay,
also fucked Sony.
Oh God.
Yeah, like
it's like that won't come back to haunt us at any point in our lives, will it?
Well, to be fair, Nintendo also fucked Sony, so
you know what?
I mean, it would have been interesting to talk about the Nintendo PlayStation a little. I mean, especially since
I was surprised that didn't come up at all.
Me too.
Like, you're going to mention the Sega and Sony part, but you're not going to mention the Nintendo and Sony part.
Yeah.
How does this never get so much as a discussion?
They talk about it a lot in the book, obviously. But, like, it's weird that is a part of gaming history that's important to note that, and also weird that they just called it Silicon Graphics and not that's actually Philips, like a company that still exists today. That had gotten together with Nintendo, and ended up making they were gonna make their CD thing that didn't happen. So like, it's interesting that they don't mention. I mean, granted, it didn't come out, right? Like, it wasn't a thing, but still, like, you could have mentioned, this even further fueled why Sony wound up making the PlayStations, because Nintendo also screwed them over. And, it's not just Sega. They made it seem like, Sega messed them up, so that's why they made the PlayStation. It's like, no.
See, that was a real nexus of the console wars, where I personally think that if Sega and Sony had been able to in fact, you know what? Scratch that. Before I even finish that thought, let's just be even more blunt about it. If Sega of Japan had decided to not stick their dick in the deal with Sony, that could have turned the console wars in a completely opposite direction. But Sega of America, their greatest foe wasn't Nintendo. It was never Nintendo. It was Sega of Japan the entire way. Just from Kalinsky's very first pitch meeting onward. That was their greatest enemy, just because of the ridiculous, foolish pride.
Yeah, it's a pride thing.
Yeah, that just sabotaged every single decision because, it wasn't our idea.
I did think it was funny that he got revenge on Sega at a point with the Silicon Graphics thing, when he brought, he brought the Sega Japan guy, and the guy was like, "Hey, I don't care," and he called Nintendo, like, "Hey, you might want to talk to these people." Like,
because he'd fucking had enough. He had enough with being screwed over by his own people, and quite frankly, I don't blame him, because God damn it.
And then it's the absolute. It's funny to learn that the absolute killer decision was made by Sega Japan themselves. Of we're gonna release the Saturn at E3 without telling anyone.
Yeah, just rush the Saturn out,
and then knock Walmart and Target off, and think that you're gonna sell your system well.
Yeah, launch KB Toys.
KB Toys and
silly, stupid bastards.
And then of course, what really helped Sony as well is the Nintendo delaying the 64 because it wasn't ready.
Well, and ultimately, the really hilarious part was the fact that by the time all was said and done, Sony had been dicked over by both parties and ended up just deciding that it was going to just turn guns on both of them.
It was it's cool because they do tell that story in the book as well, even though it doesn't have to do with Sega or Nintendo. But they actually go through and tell you the PlayStation started at the music division in Sony. Mm-hmm. With some of the people that worked over in the music division were kind of just fooling around with it. There was one guy, I can't remember his name. He really wanted to get working on a system, and he kept trying to tell the head of Sony at the time, hey, look at what's happening with Nintendo and Sega. This could really work. We could really do it. But they were stuck on trying to be a partner because they wanted to kind of dip their toe. They didn't want to just full force go in, right? Because they were obviously worried about, well, what if we flame out? Then what happens to us? So, it's interesting to, end up learning that story of Sony kind of got pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed until the guy finally goes, you know what? Screw both of these guys. We're doing it. And they wound up, being the big console maker that they are right now, So, it's, obviously Nintendo is still existing and still doing well. But yeah, Sega it seemed like from that point, after they messed over on Sony, they were going wobbling and eventually just couldn't compete after that.
Thanks, guys. You both poked the bear enough times, and now it's going to eat you both.
It also seemed like they didn't have any ideas beyond Sonic either.
No, they didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, no, they had some, but I mean, Sonic's obviously the platform mascot. I mean, no offense
right, but when you look at Nintendo, they have other franchises, right? That are, Mario's the big one. But
the documentary didn't really go into depth about any of those. He didn't say, and we got Zelda and Metroid and, a bunch of other shit. That's kind of interesting. It was always Mario versus Sonic and that's it.
Well, because Sega didn't have anything else to compete. So, if they start talking about, because this was really a Sega documentary that they had to throw the Nintendo stuff in there because it's a war.
That's the way it felt, yeah.
Yeah, it really felt more of a we're gonna try to paint all these Sega people in the nicest way we possibly can while also having to talk about their demise, basically.
Well, it's just like the WCW documentaries on the WWE network.
Well, history is written by the winners.
Yeah. This guy was an independent party, but I don't know who had a hand in this version of the document. I think, Blake Harris is obviously a producer in deciding some of the stuff that gets included, but it does feel like there was let's try to be as nice as possible to all these people that we're having to interview and not paint it in a really bad light. I don't know. That seems weird to me too, that you're not gonna, when you're talking about how Nintendo eventually gains ground, it is also through the games, right? It is also through having Zelda, having Metroid. By the time Pokemon comes around, Sega's on its last leg, so it doesn't really matter. But having these other, maybe not brand defying games, but also just having so much support from these other companies that have games that you still think about all these years later. The Final Fantasies, Sega had the sports games, but Nintendo had, like you said, Sean, everything else. And that wound up being an important factor at the end of it. Is just, now not only did you have to deal with Nintendo, you had to deal with Sony, and the amount of partners that you had were very small at the end, so.
Well, Yeah, I mean, you had a lot of people who had burned a whole lot of bridges.
Yeah, I mean, and then also, Tom leaves in like 96, like after the Saturn thing, so whoever, the small amount of, and then Steve Race, who is extremely important in the marketing thing, goes to Sony,
Well, it's funny because Tom leaves and Peter Moore takes over Sega. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Although he did run Dreamcast for a while, I think.
Yeah, I think so. What did you guys think of I'd seen some of the stuff with the, court proceedings or whatever when the Congress gets involved for trying to, which eventually leads to the, ESRB getting formed.
Absolutely blew my mind.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting to see those,
Lieberman seems like such a hack.
Yeah.
Always has. Yeah.
It's such a, he's leading the charge at that point against video games. I mean, it's obviously a good thing that video games were able to defend themselves well enough to just make their own rating system so that the Congress didn't have to get involved. But yeah, that was interesting to Bill White, who had switched sides at that point, is taking shots at Howard Lincoln on the other side of the table with the Super Scope, which I had one of those.
Yeah, until Lincoln had his moment of, listen here, you little shit.
Yeah.
That was a real, he took aim at the king and he fucking missed.
Yeah.
He took aim at the king and he shot himself in the dick.
Yeah, is there anything else before we, I guess, move on to talking about how we feel about the console wars that are happening right now? Anything about, yeah.
Oh, the Howard guy was pretty good. The Howard and Nestor guy, I forget his name. Howard Phillips, that was it. He seemed pretty genuine. He also he also looks like Charles Martinet's kid, which I thought was weird but funny.
Oh yeah, he's super, his story is super interesting because he winds up being him and Gail Tilden, which they showed in that documentary a few times, are the major forces around why Nintendo Power becomes such an important...
She was weird because they didn't explain her story at all. So the first time she's on, it's just editor or co-founder of Nintendo Power or said something about that, but it's
you don't even tell us that Nintendo had a magazine.
Yeah.
That was important. I get them... Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, it wasn't until way later when they got into his story, him and her and that other guy were doing the arcade business and stuff like that. We were oh, that's her. You should have maybe clued that in a little earlier. I thought, she was a huge Nintendo fangirl, or that's how it kind of came across to me.
Right.
And it's no, she actually worked at Nintendo.
No, she was a huge part of...
That would have helped, introduce that a little earlier on.
That's what was surprising to me, because they showed so much of, Ellen Van Buskirk, but they did not, really tell the story of Gail, who's very important, because not just from the Nintendo Power perspective, but I think she also had a lot of decisions on how certain things looked in the marketing and certain characters and promoting certain characters and all of that. So that was interesting that they kind of shortened her story, and they didn't they showed this in the High Score documentary, but they didn't really talk about it here, was the whole Nintendo having the people that you can call to tell you how to get through games and stuff like that.
Oh God, what a brilliant money grab that was.
That's cool, because, this is before you have all these strategy guides you can buy and everything. Just call somebody that all they do is actually play video games, So yeah, it's I thought overall, I thought it was a really good hour and 30 minutes, which to me, that's the sweet spot of documentaries. I think once you start getting past that, that's when you start running into oh, this is getting overboard here. I got to the point. There was a good middle and end, start, middle, end. And there were some things I guess we poked at that they could have talked about, but I felt overall, for having to condense a very thorough book into an hour and 30 minutes, they did pretty well, pretty decently.
I thought it was much better than that High Score documentary, that series. I thought that thing was it was a little too bloated, but it was all over the place. And even in the same episode, they would focus on 4 different disparate topics. And I was like, wait, why are you doing this? Like, just focus on one thing. It's fine.
I still need to watch it. I haven't gotten around to it yet.
if you ever do, I guess we can do the talking about that.
You know what? I could probably. How many episodes is it?
It's six episodes that are like.
Is that it?
What, 45 minutes? No, because they stop right before they get to the PlayStation 1.
Yeah, it's the same break point as this thing, pretty much.
Yeah, but it seems like it was a trial thing. Like they were gonna just let's see if this gets traction on Netflix, and then if it does, we'll do more episodes.
Shit, I could watch that over the next week.
But like the problem with that thing, like I said, is like it has topics that are just very incongruous with one another, and then interviews. Some of the people that interview are just like really like why are you interviewing this person? Like,
yeah, it's extremely broad.
You know, and this is just a general, just random tangential thought, kind of about gamer culture and media. It's astounding that here we're talking about a CBS All-Access documentary, which, don't get me wrong, it's a superlative one. It's outstanding. It's entertaining. I have hardly a bad thing at all to say about it. But then you've got this 6-part Netflix docuseries about gaming, and I'm not sure that you get as much information about either as you could get from some of the better informed and researched YouTube channels that get just no love whatsoever, no attention. They're not household names. They don't have huge distribution.
Yeah, but it's all, I mean, at least this documentary is based on this, like Harris, taking all that information or collating it into a good book. That's why this series, or this movie's good in the first place.
Oh, no, I'm not entirely demeaning them. I'm just sitting here and thinking to myself, you're talking about how kind of all over the place High Score was. And I'm just thinking about a lot of the channels that I watch and how impressed I always am by how tightly focused everything is and how well all the episodes flow.
Yeah.
It's just amusing to me.
I agree. I felt like the problem with High Score was that they tried to put in so much stuff because they felt like they had to answer to so many different gamer audiences that are out there now that they didn't focus it very well. I'm not saying you have to go in order and tell me every single little thing that happened from the Atari to PlayStation 1, because that obviously would have been way more than 6 episodes. And I get it that you had to put in some of the competitive stuff because obviously competitive gaming is important now and streaming is important now and all of that. But it's like the way they do it is just weird. Like you go from showing a kid a Nintendo competition smack in the middle of talking about some other thing, and then you go and talk about that same other thing after
you
finish with the
interstitials. Yeah. And they have they talk about the SEGA competition in episode 5, and it's like, why didn't you pair that up with the Nintendo kid?
Exactly.
4 episodes back,
and just have it be a one episode about competitive gaming or whatever.
My favorite one is they talk about PC RPGs for a second, early RPGs, and they interview Ken and Roberta Williams, which is fine. They interview Lord British, Richard Garriott, and that's fine.
Nice. And
then they interview Yoshitaka Amano, the artist for Final Fantasy, and it's like, what? Like, I will say the guy from Final Fantasy should be interviewed, but what about Sakaguchi? The guy who directed the game,
even Nomura, or someone.
No offense to the artist, but it's like, who cares, And I think they also interviewed Sonic the Hedgehog's artist, and it's like, there's someone called Yuji Naka who created Sonic more than the artist.
Right, yeah.
I mean, if you have an artist episode, that's fine, but they don't. They just throw these interviews in with randomly, and it's like, this is a little weird.
See, and I would love that. I would love to watch an episode where they just talk to preeminent artists
Yeah, they don't have that
from various
episode.
genres. They don't? Because you see, that's such a missed opportunity to talk about how so many of those disparate styles kind of
Red Bull
influence
also
the
has
game's
a
success or
series I
failure.
think that they did that was pretty good.
Yeah,
as
but that was
well.
like 7 years ago.
No, but that one also goes into different things like sound and
Yeah.
other things of gaming that you don't always necessarily think about, which is good. But going back to this, I guess if you had to give it I don't know, do y'all do this on TV Party? Do you give things scores at the end, or how do you?
No, Mark just kind of does the whole, as he puts it, I think, final thoughts, 50 words or less. But if we're to put a score on it,
Oh, yeah, okay, let's just do that. Let's put, what are your final thoughts, 50 words or less? Are you recommending this to people? Obviously, I mean, if you don't have a free trial, which obviously, I mean, not trying to trick anyone, not trying to get people to not pay $6 or $7, whatever this costs, to get CBS All-Access for a month. Now, you can just sign up for a free trial, watch it, and then, cancel before your free trial ends. Are you recommending this to people?
You want me to go first, or should Mark?
Oh, you can go.
Okay. Fantastically entertaining, remarkably informative, engaging format, a little bit skewed. Okay, it's very skewed, yes. But I think it really paints both sides in just the right light, ultimately. I would highly recommend it. At the very least, I would give it an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I was going to give it an 8 out of 10 also. Like, I don't find it as skewed as you do, per se, but I still think it was informative and entertaining. And it's good to see these people who were literally there tell their own stories.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would definitely say 8 out of 10 as well. Which on the WTM scale, that's a great. So, like, it's a great documentary that includes pretty much everybody that was important that is discussed in the book, giving their thoughts on what they felt during those times. And you really do get a history lesson of what that was like back then in the first console wars, but before what we have today, and shaping what we have today. And if you care about the history of games at all, I think it's awesome to have that and be able to watch it. And, and then you have the book or other things to read if you want to go into it more. I think for being a nice snippet of the history of Nintendo, history of Sega during that time and what they did against each other, it's pretty awesome, I would say. So because we are in or about to be in, well, technically we're still in, but are about to be in a new generation of console wars between Sony and their PlayStation 5 and Microsoft and their Xbox Series X and Game Pass, and what that means for gaming as compared to what is about to be $70 video games that you're going to go out and buy, at least for the big AAA companies, and now what that could mean for these smaller companies at what they price their games at, furthermore, and then everything that comes with that. Like, what are your feelings going into, I guess, this next-gen console war? Are you excited for it? Are you a bit worried about it? Like, thinking about where we came from to right now, I go, how do you feel about the PlayStation, Microsoft taking off? Sean, I guess.
I mean, I'm never an early adopter. I'm really not. When a new console comes out, I like to give it about a year or two for kinks to kind of get ironed out, for libraries to build up. Don't get me wrong. There's no question which one I'm buying. It's going to be a PlayStation 5. Because I've always found that I think they're the ones who are more dedicated to, for lack of a better word that I'm groping for and can't find, kind of gaming purism, sort of, in that's always come across as that is their first and foremost focus, is on not just games, but also on putting out a massive library of superb first-party games. But that being said, I think we're entering a period wherein that gap in terms of both originals and graphical power is becoming so narrow that it's going to be intriguing to see what Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo do to maintain whatever their edges happen to be. Because, anymore, I think more often than not, the graphical gap between Xbox and PlayStation in particular is becoming almost negligible. It's I think why Microsoft acquiring Bethesda is such a huge deal, because with crossplay becoming more and more widespread, and with there being now fewer and fewer exclusives to set brands apart, having access to that many franchises as either full-fledged exclusives or, at best timed exclusives going forward, that's monumental, because I'm not sure there are that many developers of that proportion that Sony could reasonably acquire to level that playing field, because I don't see them ever just, fully buying out a Ubisoft, or, definitely not Electronic Arts.
They'll buy Square.
If they did it though, they'd buy a Japanese company.
Yeah, it would be. It would be, and in fact, Square would probably be the first one they would go after.
The first one they'd go after is Capcom
or Konami.
No, because
Konami would be. I guess Konami would be. You could say as from a gaming standpoint, because they don't make that many games anymore from a traditional console perspective. It would seem that they would be the easiest get, but because of all of their things that they do, pachinko and everything else, maybe more difficult.
I don't think. I'll be honest. Just as a brief sidebar, I don't think it's a matter of if Konami eventually gets gobbled up by one of the consoles. I think it's a matter of when. I think that they kept taking more and more rope to hang themselves with a lot of their business decisions, and I don't think it's something that may even happen within about the next year or so. But it wouldn't surprise me if by the next console generation they did get fully bought up. Capcom I don't know about, because Capcom has undergone such a resurgence in terms of how much new life they've breathed into new franchises over the past few years. Well, that's kind of what I meant. Yeah, I'm sorry, I said new, I meant old. Into old franchises that had either stagnated or were just fully dead, that I think they can still get some more mileage out of that and continue to kind of redefine themselves. I think their next generation of fighting games is going to be extremely telling, because they can't afford another debacle like the early Street Fighter V launch or the entirety of Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. But I think they're really going to need to pull a Resident Evil with those brands in the very near future. Otherwise, Warner Brothers is going to continue to just run them right over. But anyway, that being neither here nor there. I think the big one is going to be who puts out the better premium subscription service. I know that the Game Pass has been hugely successful. I personally am a big PS Plus guy. I know that PS Now has got a rather sizable library, but that it doesn't compare to what Game Pass is offering on a continuous basis and in terms of how many new titles are being added at a time. But even then, you look at what Sony did in terms of, you want to talk about something that's really consumer friendly. They looked at their customer base honestly, and they acknowledged a lot of these people are going to either choose not to buy a PS5 at launch, or they're just not going to be able to. And also kind of acknowledging that I think that they had a really thin launch library. So they're like, look, okay, if you do buy a PS5, we're going to sweeten the pot for you and incentivize this. we are going, in addition to all the other games where we're saying that your digital copies from the PS4, they're going to be backwards compatible, you're going to get a free upgrade, this and that. Here you go. If you bite the bullet and buy the PS5, we're going to give you 18 of our top tier games right off the bat with a PS Plus membership. You put down $10 a month, these 18 games are yours to play for as long as you're a member. That is huge. That is a huge, very friendly concession, in addition to having what's comparably a pretty reasonable price point. And that's
I think it's huge for people that are gonna buy a PS5 and didn't own the PS4, or own the PS4 very late and didn't get to play a lot of that stuff. Anybody that already has owned a PS4 during that entire time, I don't think that this really means a whole lot to them. But
yeah. And I mean, in terms of a lot of the multiplayer games that I played, my understanding as I've read it, and feel free to correct me if I've missed something, is that when it comes to games like, again, just throwing out the ones that I play, games like Apex Legends, Overwatch, Rainbow Six Siege, Mortal Kombat 11, the PS4 versions are still going to be fully compatible with their PS5 counterparts.
Yes.
It sounds like that's going to be the case for at least a few years until the PS4 is fully phased out. And I would imagine when that happens, the developers of those games, the ones that are actually pay, by the way, so discounting Apex Legends, are probably going to say, hey, when you switch over, we're going to let you kind of port everything else over. You get a free upgrade, no questions asked. You paid once. We're not going to make you do it again.
I mean, I think some of those games, but I don't think like Mortal Kombat we've ported over.
Yeah, I mean, Mortal Kombat, that also have Mortal Kombat 12.
Or like Overwatch. I mean, Overwatch doesn't come into the PS5.
Overwatch is going to have an Overwatch 2, so that won't matter.
True.
Well, who knows when Blizzard gets around to it. But it depends on if Activision pushes their hand to make it come out pretty soon or whatever.
That's true. That's true. I guess we'll know more about that in January. As a long-suffering Overwatch vet, crikey, fuck, I hope we learn more in January. But
they have too much Diablo Immortals news to talk about first.
Yeah. Well, Rainbow Six, you're definitely right. Ubisoft is just going to keep. They already said it. It's going to be under a different name. Rainbow Six something, Siege something else, something. For PS5 and Series X, but it's going to be supported, and they're pretty good about that. For the most part,
I like the fact that I've still got, I think, probably a few more years left with those games where they're going to be viable on my current console. But I really think that's what it's going to come down to going forward. It really is just going to be those bonuses, those subscription models.
But I mean, you say that, but
it's a real bummer for me since I don't give a shit about any of that stuff.
But because that's interesting because although Sony did make a large amount of their old titles available to stream, right? Because I think older than PS4, you can't download them. I think it's only PS4 games that you can download, right?
I think that's the other reason they probably decided to do it, was when they finally had to acknowledge that everything that all the rumors they kind of allowed to kind of gather steam about, oh boy, the PS5 is going to be backwards compatible all the way back to the PS2. When they finally had to admit it, I think they were also like, oh, people are going to be pissed. We better throw them something here.
Yeah.
But God, I had another. But kind of getting back to the exclusives thing for a second, because this just occurred to me. Going forward, I do think that when those rare opportunities come up, this could be huge because there's going to be so few. Because I'm thinking about the fact that when Bayonetta came out and it was such a huge success, the most baffling thing was that Platinum Games found so much trouble finding a backer for a sequel to this already mega popular game, to the extent that the only reason we have Bayonetta 2 and a forthcoming Bayonetta 3 is because of all possible parties, Nintendo stepped up and said, we love your game. We'd love to see you make another one. One catch. It's ours.
Yeah, well, you just talked about Bayonetta being, a big hit, but it wasn't. It was a big critical hit, sure, but it barely broke 200,000 copies.
Yeah, it wasn't this big. Well, it also didn't help that didn't Xbox have exclusivity for a while?
No, it launched in the same.
Oh, I thought Xbox.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
but
again,
it was just promoted a lot with Xbox or something. Yeah, but
again, it was big enough. But again, it was a big enough success, and it showed enough promise that, like I said, it was enough to merit a sequel that Nintendo was excited about.
Well, that's like Psychonauts. That's like Psychonauts 2. No one wanted it. I mean, they had to kickstart it, or I think dig it or something. But because the first one sold okay and has good critical reviews, but just no one else wanted it. I mean, hell, Microsoft tried to kill the first one.
Yeah,
I mean, it can be a big deal. I don't think it's something that can necessarily be depended on anymore, just because exclusivity is going to be so much harder to come by now that times are changing. But I think you're going to see more and more. You may see publishers trying to really pounce on that, so they can have one of those rare things where it's like a Spider-Man or a God of War or The Last of Us or a Halo or Gears of War, where it's just, this is ours. We want this to be the reason why you buy this console.
Yeah. Going back to your thing you were talking about a little bit ago, before we completely get off that topic, because you were talking about old games and how, some people were making a fuss about how the PS1, the PS3 games were not going to be backwards compatible. But it's interesting when we go back and talk about Console Wars, the documentary, right? You didn't really get that, right? Like, Nintendo had to be convinced and made to make an adapter that would work with from the Super Nintendo to the NES in order to make your NES games work, because they wanted to make sure that, because, they didn't want angry parents when they went and bought the Super Nintendo that their Nintendo games didn't work. And, I think the Master System games worked already with Genesis, right?
You had to have a power-based adapter. You had to buy, this $40 add-on or whatever, but yeah. Yeah,
so, you pretty much went into a console generation, and that was kind of the same until you got to the PS1, PS2, of that system is not going to be able to play those other games. You kind of just got to deal with it. And then now we've gone into the opposite, where people seem to be getting upset, and you have one company that they obviously had to make the PS4 games work because that's what you're going to be playing mostly for a while when these PS5 games come out, because they won't really be true PS5 games. For the most part, a lot of those, and Xbox just decided we're just going to embrace all your games. I mean, almost all your games are going to pretty much work on this thing, even way back to the original Xbox. Interesting that we've gone, into this, we want our old games. We want them. We don't want them to, just be we accept that we're going to be playing our old games, not having all these brand new PS5 and Series X games to play, going into a new generation. That's kind of funny to think about, as compared to the old consoles where you were oh, Genesis has this Genesis game and it's just a Genesis game, and the Super Nintendo is a Super Nintendo game, But I think what's interesting as well is just you talked about subscription services, but I feel like Sony has come out and they don't want anything to do with a subscription service. If you listen to Jim Ryan talk, he doesn't,
Well, they don't see the value, which is, kind of valid for which is going to make more, is them selling Sony or it just being on some service.
Yeah. No, definitely. It's interesting that you say that. It's interesting you say that Sean, because there's only one company that's really going towards that. So do you feel like Microsoft's right then that eventually Game Pass will be winning out?
You know what? I really do. And I say that with no small measure of disappointment, because when I got the PlayStation 4, that was the first time I had ever had a subscription service. And I got the PS Plus because, well, for one thing, my good friend Cole Marentet, when I got my PS4, he gifted a year of PS Plus to me, like right off the bat. In no small part, so that he and I could play multiplayer stuff together. But the value I also found in it is that, number one, as we all know, games are fucking expensive. It's
right.
One of the big advantages, I think, of being a PC gamer is Steam seasonal sales. The closest equivalent that I have is that I know that, like clockwork, every single year for about 2 months in December and January, Sony goes absolutely apeshit with their deals.
And now even in November. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Now it's like every other month.
Oh yeah. And just absolutely.
Well, and also like clockwork
prices.
now too. A lot of the big games, unless you're talking about Nintendo or some publishers, most of them, if you wait 4 to 6 months, those games come down to like half price.
Oh yeah, huge price drops.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Well now, okay, so take all that into consideration. And then also consider that for the $10 a month that I pay for PS Plus, I get usually an additional hefty discount slashed off of that.
Mm-hmm.
There's the exclusive PS Plus sales that we get. There's, for the various free-to-play games that I have, there's the freebies that I get just for being a PS Plus member, which, yeah, not much monetary value, but still nice to have. And then on top of all that, I get 2 free games a month that are just mine, free to play for as long as I'm a paid PS Plus member. Now, yes, I will.
I was going to say, the problem with your whole argument is you still have to pay to play online. And I wouldn't be a PS Plus member if I didn't have to do that.
See, but that's the thing, is I don't mind having to pay to play online, considering how much value I'm getting.
I mean, I don't mind it. I don't mind, but I don't consider it a value. I consider them kind of screwing me. Because it's, it's always games that I don't care about that I'm just adding to my stupid, library. It's like, I don't care about Battlegrounds. I already have it on Steam. There's a better version on there. Or, I don't care about, Battlefront 2. It's like, great.
Well, that's fair. That's fair, and I get where you're coming from.
But to be fair, yes. there are a lot of people like, and I'm one of them. I don't have the ability to go and buy every Sony exclusive that comes out.
Yes,
at the time that it comes out, and a lot of times those big Sony exclusives wind up coming to PS Plus, and then as long as I keep subscribing, I get that game.
The big Sony exclusives never come to PS Plus. That's the thing.
Well, they do. They do eventually.
Is my mic on? Because this is the point. This is the point that I was trying to make before, Mark kind of cut in, is the fact that when you pile all of that up, and when you pile up how expensive a hobby gaming can be, is $10 to. I don't look at it as $10 to play online. I look at it as $10 a month that I'm paying. That also makes it a fuck ton cheaper for me to keep my library thoroughly topped up. And yes, some months I look at the exclusives or the 2 freebies that I get, and I go, holy shit, you threw me a bone with that one. Thank you. And some months I look at it and, it's either, okay, that's an indie that looks intriguing and one that I either already own or,
it's not in your wheelhouse at all.
Yeah, I already own it, or I'm not interested. But still, even in those months when the freebies aren't that great, I still have to kind of weigh that against, look at all the great shit that I've already gotten that I wouldn't have gotten without without this $10 a month. This is really not a half bad deal.
But what PS Plus does is not, to me, it's not the same as what Game Pass is.
No. Oh, no, it's absolutely
like,
not. Oh.
Like, so that was my point, is that as Sony is saying that they want nothing to do with that, Nintendo obviously wants nothing to do with that because they're even slow with putting their old games on their service that they want you to pay $20 for.
That require no effort.
Yeah,
and
like
Nintendo boggles my mind with how resistant they are to people who want to absolutely stuff their money into a pneumatic cannon and fire it at Seattle at escape velocity.
That surprises me too, because it's just like, you're obviously probably not going to make any more console minis. The Super Nintendo and Nintendo are it. And like,
yeah.
I mean, they could come out with a 64 mini, but I just really doubt it. You have now you're making people pay $20, which $20 a year is not bad at all. But like, now you're making people pay $20 a year to do online gaming, which you didn't do before. And part of that was your old games that you're going to be putting on there. And now it continuously gets less and less that you put on there. And instead of putting on the games that like, it's not like you have a virtual console that you're trying to get people to buy the games. You're giving people games that like no one cares about, with maybe one every 6 months that they do. And it's just weird.
You have a fan base that is openly telling you, we want to give you money. We will happily give you money for these games if you will just make them available. Straight up. And then the piracy happens because Nintendo doesn't want to accept the money. All you have to do, you have the games right there. You've demonstrated. You have the capability to put them on the virtual console.
You demonstrated with the Mario All-Stars that you have no problem just emulating your games as well.
Yes.
Like, I mean,
and then, oh God, that's a whole other kettle of fish right there, is this whole notion of you're doing the Disney Vault thing with Mario 3D All-Stars, which, what the Smurfy blue fuck? Seriously.
It worked though, right? It sold out. Normally games don't sell out like that anymore.
I know, but you're having to go that route when, on the other hand, you have these games you're not doing anything with. And again, you have the technology, and then you want to breathe fire and brimstone about modders and emulators who are only putting the games out there for free in the first place because you won't make them widely available, and we want to play them.
Yeah, and it's not like people are asking them for free. Yeah. Yeah, Sega.
Oh, Sega.
But, so, I guess my point is, do you feel like we are going to eventually see Game Pass be so successful that the other two companies do wind up having to do that?
No.
Or, cause you're saying this is gonna be, my point, I'm just getting at Sean here because he's saying that it is going to come down to your subscription services.
I'm saying that if anything is going to eventually maybe give Microsoft an edge, it's going to be this. It's going to be the value of the subscription service.
Yeah.
And then I think what you could see happen as there end up being fewer and fewer opportunities for either one to kind of gather a unique edge, I think you're going to see people try to come up with ways to compete with Microsoft for that. But Microsoft may already be far enough ahead at that point that there's just no catching up to them in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I think you very well could be right. I mean, let's see what happens with the Amazon Luna thing. Because obviously it seems like Microsoft is trying to think many years ahead with their entire strategy on two levels, and then also still have their toes dipped in what's going on right now. With, you have your console, you can still buy your console if you want it, but there's also Game Pass on PC, and we're going to put all of our games on PC that are part of our first party lineup. And then we also have the xCloud thing, which competes with Google Stadia and Amazon Luna and whatever other streaming. I wouldn't be surprised if Apple comes out with their own streaming thing at some point. Like, you know, cause that might be the way of the future at some point, where
might be.
We have a large contingent of people that decide, you know what, I'm not buying a console. I'm just gonna stream a game. I mean, as the internet keeps getting better and perhaps internet will proliferate at some point to be able to cover other areas of even just the United States that doesn't have good internet right now, to where this could be viable. But yeah, I mean, it may be beyond our lifetimes as well, or when we're at the age where all we're doing is sitting at home. So where this happens, but you know, in our kids' lifetimes, so they get to see it, that's what gaming is. I don't know, but maybe Microsoft has their butts covered for that.
It's charming to think that we are going to be the first generation of elderly, lifelong gamers.
Right? Like, we'll be 70 and still playing the newest game that came out.
Oh, you know it.
Like, still talking about whatever PlayStation 8 and, you know, Xbox, if Microsoft's still in it by that point. It's still making
look, I'm
consoles
on my deathbed. Can I have Mother 3, please?
Mark, what do you think is going to be like the war, continuing war, I guess, going into this generation?
It'll still be all the fanboy nonsense, but which is more powerful, which has the better games. And it's all a matter of what games you care about. I mean, I'm getting the PS5 launch because I care about those games more than the Xbox lineup personally, or, you know, their franchises.
Yeah,
even if a lot of those coming to the Xbox at this point, but still, Sony still has more exclusives that I care about, like Spider-Man versus Halo.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing, right? Is that you mentioned that exclusives are getting smaller and smaller, but exclusives are still important.
Yeah, I don't think that's the case. I mean, if anything, they're getting bigger because, like, you know, like they look at like past console launches. I mean, most of those have sucked ass.
Well, no, what he means is that, like, we're seeing way more people decide that we're going third party.
Sure, but I mean, both consoles still have, like, you know, their exclusives, but, you know, now it's just paired. You know, I don't care about Blinks the Time Sweeper or, you know, stuff like that.
Right, we're being a bit more picky and choosy with the exclusives. And, you know, now we're signing up time exclusives and all that other stuff. Mm-hmm. Right? That's also important.
Yeah, hell, Cuphead isn't an exclusive anymore.
I think there was apparently deals always to bring Cuphead, and
was it?
Well, because Microsoft doesn't own those studios, like they were independent. Microsoft just partnered with them, and so there was always deals for those games to go to other consoles. Now, will Ori ever show up on a PlayStation? I don't know.
No.
But, like, it's showing up on the Switch. I think there was always a deal in place for that. So, you know, yeah, I just, it's, like, I really do think what you're saying, Sean, is what we really have to keep a close eye on, is Microsoft's strategy is either going to become this thing that maybe by the next generation everybody's going to be jumping on, or it's just going to be a way for them to gain money and have a thing to cover their butts if some of these other studios that they bought don't come out with, you know, killer games. Right? I mean, I'm not talking about the Bethesda ones. I'm talking about, you know,
I'm sure Compulsion Games who made We Happy Few, they're working on something great.
Yeah, I mean, poor We Happy Few, man. They, Compulsion Games just, didn't help themselves with that at all. But, yeah, I'm just really, like, fascinated by what this could become as far as gaming of Bethesda's now gonna put their games put into Game Pass. So now you're going to choose do you pay $15 or do you pay $70 to have your game on the console of your choice? And does that make you switch over or at least own both consoles? I think that's the thing too, right? Like, I think the thing that we're going to see a lot more of is perhaps it's not necessarily a war of choosing one or the other. I think it's more of now you're going to own both.
I could see that.
Especially with the Series S around and being cheaper. And I'm pretty sure if xCloud does well, they might come out with an even cheaper SKU that's just xCloud related. So, yeah. What we'll have to see is, we're almost like a month away, like about 5 weeks away from these consoles launching. It's amazing to think about that. That we're at that point again, especially with everything that's happened in 2020.
See, and I'm gonna express what's probably gonna be a bold, easy to disagree with opinion, but it's how I feel regardless. Given the way 2020 has proceeded all along, one of my, I don't know, which YouTuber was it? There was one that I was listening to that called 2020 the year of the free pass. And it's because so much has gone so far sideways that anything that really didn't quite go to plan or produce some underwhelming results, this is one time it would really be fair to slap an asterisk on a lot of things, because there were a lot of extenuating circumstances that came into play that people couldn't have helped. That being said, both in terms of how a lot of consumers' buying power is going to be limited, release schedules have been thrown and everything. In all honesty, I wouldn't have really thrown much of a fuss if, maybe not in terms of collusion, but just independently, if Microsoft and Sony had both reached the conclusion, we could just put launching these new consoles off for at least a little while longer. I mean,
Sony might, but I don't think Microsoft ever will, because they view it as they need to get their shit out first.
Yeah, which I get. But again, Sony is the one that I've long viewed as, in many cases, being a little more flexible and a little more understanding of their consumer base. Oh yeah, hell, look at the fact that they did something that's unthinkable for a lot of huge gaming companies to do, and that's to openly, no excuses whatsoever, admit we fucked up our pre-orders. To just publicly just put that right out there. That's something Microsoft damn sure wouldn't do. But it's something, and again, I know it's not going to happen, especially now. We're committed, but I think it's something that would have been maybe an idea worth looking at, because now, if sales maybe aren't what they could have been, or if they're a little slow out of the gate, they're then going to have to, and everybody is going to have to consider, they released it coming off the first year of the pandemic, when a lot of household incomes absolutely got nuked from orbit. And it murdered a lot of buying power.
Well, have fun playing Halo on launch day.
Yeah, and it's already caused a lot. Like, you think about it, all these controversies that are now have been happening, right? Like, now they just announced what Microsoft or Sony had to come out and say that Spider-Man PS4 saves now work on PS5 because they were
very cool
last week until everybody got all raged about it. Because Microsoft is kind of nuking people's idea of what gaming is right now, right? With all these like upgrade things for free, and backwards compatibility works very well, and all this other stuff. So, as weird as it is to be talking about Microsoft in that way, it's cool when, like we saw with Sega, somebody comes and makes the sitting company that's on the top have to change a little bit of what they do
You know what?
Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me that would be where Microsoft would gain some ground, though, because my perception has always been that Sony has always made the more dependable, mechanically anyway, hardware.
Right.
Less prone.
Helps
less
a
prone
lot
to
when
lot
the
of them.
360 has the Roading of Death happen.
Well, yeah, exactly. And to some extent, I've always possibly kind of naively and reductively, just kind of looked at it as, well, for years, Sony made things like electronics, stereos, TVs, and the like, portable music players, stuff like that. Whereas, what is Microsoft best known for? Software, networking, digital infrastructure. So it stands to reason that Microsoft would have the better networking, the better online experience, the better software, the better implementation of cloud technology. Just in my little reductive brain, that just kind of makes sense to me. So yeah, I mean, Sony is going to have an arms race on their hands.
Yep, it's certainly gonna be something to watch for this generation of how things change, what becomes the next. Battle Royale was the big thing this generation. What gaming genre is gonna be the next big thing when we talk about, the service game was also a thing. What will be the next iteration or the next thing that we go into with this generation?
That's a great question, and I don't have a ready-made prediction for that.
Connect 3.0.
Get out.
The only games that we know will not work backwards compatible are Connect.
Well, it's funny. I mean, you talk about backwards compatible, but it's not full backwards compatibility with the older consoles.
Right. I'm making
kind of
it
the really
joke,
funny part. Yeah.
Well, right now they're trying to. Are you talking about the stuff that's happening right now, or are you talking about?
I'm talking about the old, the original Xbox and 360 stuff.
Well, yeah, no, it's not. Neither is going to be a lot of the PS4 stuff either. That's just how it works. Right. Will they go back and try to make some of those other games? It's impossible, dude, because of licenses and everything else. They can't. Nothing will work like it did for the PS1 to PS2.
Yeah.
It's just.
Well, that still wasn't 100% perfect, but yeah.
It breaks my heart that the generations to come, their only experience with Silent Hill is probably going to be the super shitty remastered collection. Like, that's what they're going to be stuck with.
And a pachinko machine.
Yeah. Like not the originals, but no, the absolute disastrous attempts to remaster them. That's crushing.
There was that one Wii game that was decent. That's about it. I have no.
Talking about Shattered Memories? No, I'm just talking about 2, 3, and 4. The ones regarded as two of the finest hours in the entire franchise, and then Silent Hill 4.
Yep.
I know those games were good.
But all right, so what do you think about what are going to be the next things to look forward to in gaming? What's going to be the thing you're watching out for when we get the next gen? And what do you think about those first console wars? You can let us know, w2network@gmail.com, to answer all of us. Sean is at Comer Codex on Twitter. You can follow him for all his musings or go watch him on stream. So what is your Twitch?
Twitch.tv/Comer Codex, and I'll be announcing on Twitter when that's going to be coming back. I just moved recently, and I'm still struggling to kind of get my schedule wrapped up so that I can get back to it. But usually when I play, it's usually about 4 nights a week of multiplayer, Overwatch, Apex, and Siege usually, and then at least 1 night a week when I play story-based games. So.
There you go.
Or no, you know what? No, that's backwards. I switched that recently. No, it's 4 nights a week of story-based games, and then 1 night when I pick one of the aforementioned titles and just decide, nah, I'm just gonna fuck around and go online for a while. Be a scrub lord for your amusement.
Fair enough. There you go. And of course, you can always catch Mr. Comer along with everybody else, the wonderful crew at the Radulich and Broadcasting that do great shows every week, to reviewing what's coming out, to talking about metal music and everything else in between. And of course, you can always catch us, Mark and I, on Video Games to the Max every week. We'll have another show for you on the Friday night, Saturday-ish morning time. We'll be talking about some of this stuff that's come out this week, and I'm sure in the next coming days there'll be some other things to talk about. Along with those Series X impressions that are already out there, talking about load times and a quick resume of your games and everything else. And, I hope you enjoyed us discussing new and old console wars, and we'll see you guys later. Take care.